Speaker, thank you very much. I think that last speech was exactly what Charles Chauvel was talking about in his speech last night. And a plea to the Labour Party, give the party both of its wings back because it needs to fly. You see, Mr Speaker, there's such a difference between the view on that side of the House and the realistic outcome on this side of the House. The student loan scheme in New Zealand is one of the most generous schemes for tertiary education anywhere in the world. And it's only possible because this government supports it, and it's only possible because hard-working New Zealanders pay their tax and allow the government to lend that money to students so that they can get degrees, can get extra education, so they can work hard raising skill levels in New Zealand and do much more for New Zealand society. And the member opposite and the party opposite just want to throw that away and say to hard-working New Zealanders, these people who are borrowing money based on the taxes you pay from your hard work have no obligation to you at all. And indeed, Mr Speaker, we've campaigned on saying that we believe the student loan scheme is important, we're committed to it staying here, but we must make it efficient, we must make it fair, and we must make it deliver for the New Zealand taxpayer as well. And I believe that we are doing that. You see, Mr Speaker, in the changes that have been made over the last 3 budgets by this government in New Zealand, I can say to the New Zealand taxpayer that the money that is being lent to students in New Zealand is being used better and it's being repaid at a faster rate, and that means we can borrow less as a government and we can also put more back into the student loan scheme so that your sons and daughters and others, be it young Peter or old Peter — it was a lovely story by the last member, it's a pity he didn't spend more time reading the bill and actually what it achieves than necessarily making up stories about a hard-working minister who yet again is bringing a bill to this House that actually helps New Zealanders. So, Mr Speaker, what we know is that this is doing very good things to support the hard-working New Zealanders who pay their tax. Very briefly, does a couple of things. It broadens the definition of income of student loans for repayment purposes. It aligns with a number of other pieces of legislation and the way that that income is treated when it comes to work out what people's obligations are. And, Mr Speaker, this is a loan. It is a contract between the New Zealand taxpayer and the student. And just as young Peter, who one day will go and be able to afford to buy a house under this government, because we are doing things that actually will have an effect upon home ownership. Not saying that we'll go out and build 100,000 homes in about a year and you'll be able to buy them all over Auckland for less than $300,000. Actual things. Well, just as young Peter would go out and would get a mortgage from a bank, he would have a contractual obligation to that bank to repay the money he's borrowed. And in this case, not only is there a contractual agreement with the government to repay, but there's a moral obligation on the part of students to repay money to the taxpayer who has lent that to them under very important circumstances so they can study and get ahead. And so that's what we're doing there. There's administrative efficiencies being found, and also the ability to match information between Inland Revenue and Customs New Zealand so that when people do go overseas, or if they're overseas and they haven't met their obligation to the government and their moral obligation to the New Zealand taxpayer, when they return, information can be sought, gathered, and we can find ways to help them realise that the only reason the New Zealand government can lend taxpayers money to students to study is because they in turn would pay it back. And I want to say finally, Mr Speaker, here, over the last 3 budgets, the changes the government have made have brought the cost of the student loan scheme from 48 cents in the dollar to 39 cents in the dollar. Now, we campaigned and said we would bring it back to 40 cents in the dollar, and now we've surpassed that. And indeed, in Budget 2012, the forecast student support changes would have provided a one-off saving of about $250 million and then annual savings of $60 to $70 million. Well, indeed, at the 30th of June 2012, the actual saving was $286 million. Again, the government has surpassed the commitment it made to New Zealanders in the budget. Finally, and this is most important, and this is what the opposition should be focusing on. Not the petty politics of them wanting to chuck money at people just to buy votes, but actually looking after all New Zealanders. Since we came to government, there's been an 11% increase in student loan repayments. 11% increase so that New Zealanders are repaying their debt to the government, meeting that contractual obligation, just as many of them are when they're paying back their loans to banks if they buy houses or cars and so on, but at the same time meeting that moral obligation to New Zealand mums and dads who work hard and pay their taxes. And I say to the Minister who's brought this bill to the House, a job well done. Thank you, Mr Speaker.
I call Dr Megan Woods.
Speaker, Labor is supporting this bill.